Hello everybody, my name is Aaron Kessler. I'm the Assistant Director for Learning Sciences and Teaching for MIT Open Learning, the residential group. Thank you for joining us today for our October xTalk, Using Digital Technologies to Refresh On-Campus Courses Over Time. I'm thrilled to be here on behalf of Jovi Nazareno and sort of the person behind making all of this work and bringing this all together. We welcome you and we're thrilled to have you here for the conversation today. Today we're discussing ways to engage in continuous improvement of on-campus learning experiences using digital technologies. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome to the panel Dr. Michael Short. Dr. Short is Associate Professor of Nuclear Science and Engineering and the 2022 winner of the MIT Bose Award for Excellence in Teaching. He's joined today by Dr. Sean Robertson, lecturer and associate director of the Helena Foundation Junior Laboratory, which hosts the experimental physics advanced laboratory sequences 813 and 814. And finally, Dr. Monika Avello, 701 introductory biology instructor and PhD alum, a former post-baccalaureate student, and most notably in my connection with her, postdoctoral associate in MITx Biology Digital Learning Lab. So a quick note on process. Our participants have received the prompt that I'm about to put up ahead of time, so they can sort of prepare their thoughts. They'll share those individually, and then we'll come together and have a discussion at the end. So let's begin by putting up the prompt, and then I'll have Dr. Short come up. So what we asked is, can you tell us a little bit about the context of your course? Help us understand what students you're supporting, where they are in their sort of learning trajectory within MIT and their sort of goals. So are they majors? Are they just in the class because it's a GIR, that type of thing? And how have you prioritized what changes to implement in next week's class, next year's class, maybe some future version of the class? How do you make those priorities and decisions? And then how have you rolled out different uses of technology, and what does it look like to think about that improvement sort of over time? What are the sort of key decisions that you sort of thought about as you approach that work? So welcome, Dr. Short, to start us off today.
I'm Mike Short. I'm a lifer. Started coming to MIT in 1998 as part of the ESP, or Educational Studies program, as a high school student. And despite many times trying to leave, never did, because it's too much fun and we do things pretty awesome here. Also had the distinct pleasure, or not, of teaching a course that I took as an undergraduate. So I teach 2201, Intro to Nuclear Physics, or Ionizing Radiation, or as I like to call it, Radiation for Everyone. I'll preface what I'm going to show you with a couple of things, which is that a lot of these tech innovations that I'm going to show you are not specific to nuclear. Almost all are generalizable. You'll see the couple that are pretty nuclear specific, but of course there's going to be some domain specificity to what we do. And while they look impressive, they're not hard to implement. And that's why I have to give a shout out, not just to the folks who implemented and got Canvas going, and there's a whole team from programmers to student helpers that helped us make the transition to Canvas, but also to those who came before and did learning modules in Stellar. Because that is the single biggest thing, that if you take the time to use a system, regardless of bugs it might have, this is what helps you do both short and long range planning and pivoting. And that's the basis of some of what I'm going to show you today. So my course is an evolution from the way that we used to teach things in the 1960s. This is what a typical classroom looked like. This is definitely what a traditional nuclear physics classroom looked like. And what you don't see, because you're seeing the backs of students' faces, is very few eyes are open. And this is a major problem in our field and required us to innovate, because people chose not to do nuclear because it was boring or hard or inaccessible, or there were all sorts of other issues. And so in 2201, we take things a little differently. On the non-tech side, we'll do things like source honey from Chernobyl and make measurements, or have students burn thousands of pounds of bananas to measure the radioactivity. But the most important change we made was no prerecs. It's an introductory course. Anyone should be able to take nuclear physics. That's easier said than done, but a lot of the tech surrounding educational innovation makes it possible. And there are a few maxims I live by that help me pivot the course in the short and the long term. So the goal is to make the course dynamic, respond to both students' needs and a rapidly evolving field, to make it personal, because nothing sets something in someone's mind and creates a scaffold to close a knowledge gap like personal experience in something as dangerous as nuclear. It should be empathetic to know that The professor actually cares about the students as people and is not simply there to grade them as if they were cuts of beef, but is interested in making whole students. Tech actually helps that in a few ways that I'll discuss. And to make things equitable, this is one of the best and least utilized things on Canvas that I want to highlight to everybody. And in long term, it helps keep the course contextual. The field evolves. Once every 20 years, a nuclear reactor seems to blow up. We get to talk about that and we're in the news all the time, right? So it helps us keep the course contextual. It helps keep the course transparent so people know what's going on behind the scenes and why, from projecting learning objectives to adapting in real time. It keeps things accessible to different types of learners. As a former MIT student myself, I did not learn well by being talked at and shown things on a board and said, go read the book and take the test. And a couple times I was told, oh, if you can't read the book and take the test, you're not good enough and you should drop the course before you fail. And that's not a growth mindset. So in this class, simple tech helps break that pattern. And finally, to make it archival, because in the end, you want to leave something for more people than just the students you teach that day. And boy, does tech help in that in a lot of ways. In terms of keeping things dynamic, rethinking the idea of a syllabus. It's no longer a thing that you hand to students at the first day of class. Having something like Canvas means that as you change things, there's one place to find everything that the students have to do. For those who wake up at 2 a.m. and say, gosh, what do I have to read or whatever do today? It just gives you a to-do list of do this by this time and you'll be okay. Or catch up tomorrow and you'll also be okay. In terms of making things personal, this is the probably nuclear one that I'll mention, is I might ask you a question about how to calculate something or other about a bunch of isotopes, or I may ask the students for some toenail clippings, which we then stick in our nuclear reactor and get gamma spectra from them. But the fact that everyone has a device now means I can give them this software, and instead of saying, here is a spectrum that someone collected in a paper, I can say, analyze your toenail spectrum on your machine and tell me how much arsenic you have. And that makes it really personal. Luckily, no one's had a reportable level, so I can just definitely say that right away. It helps us be more empathetic, and you might not think of tech and empathetic as in the same sentence, but what it does is allow students time to see distributions, but it also opens up opportunities to affirm values. For example, that the people in our class are not distributions. And so every time now that you have grades, you can instantly see where you fall on some normal or whatever not normal curve. It provides the instant opportunity to remind everyone that no grade is final. It's not an assessment of your intelligence. We already kind of did that in admissions. There's no point in doing it again. And we're here to help you grow, not to grade you on a curve. By the way, grading on a curve is illegal at MIT, so for anyone who's listening. And finally, it helps us make things equitable. And this is one of my favorite features. So I will take a minute to explain this. I started rethinking assessment. What's the point of a quiz? It's not really for me to grade students. It's for students to have a full stakes, personal but low stakes grade total assessment of what have I actually learned, confront one's weaknesses and have an opportunity to strengthen them. And when you rethink the idea of how should a quiz be done, that's made me realize the way we do things in academia was mainly for the convenience of the instructor. It's a lot easier for us to give an exam in one room when we're right there and we can monitor everything, and we can write questions where you have to get a number and monitor that there's cheating, or isn't. So I've got a 5-year experiment granted by the registrar to let all quizzes be taken at home. And that allows me to release quizzes to different students at different times, so that I don't want to know what you know at a certain point in space-time. I want to know what you know when you're at your best. Like in the real world, if you're asked to do something, it's rarely going to be life or death that you have to do it that second. It's more, I want to know what you've learned. And that helps me identify knowledge gaps to build the student and let them do a do-over of the quiz if necessary. Because my goal is to assess that they've learned the material by the end of the course, not by a specific instance in space-time, let's say, when all the other midterms are happening. The long-term things helps us keep it contextual. For example, when the Fukushima disaster happened, that provided, well, it was a bad accident and it was a good learning opportunity. So we can pull things, I would say, MIT libraries is one of our best and most underutilized pieces of tech, along with the librarians who are not pieces of tech. They're fantastic. But it lets us ask questions like, how much more radioactive is the ocean due to Fukushima? Send the students to the paper, which they all have access to on MIT campus, and so they can make all of their assessments very real answer questions they're going to get at the Thanksgiving dinner table by their parents. So you're nuclear. So didn't Fukushima make it so we can't eat fish anymore? Well, they know how to answer that question. It helps us make things transparent. 30 lines of code is all it takes to lower the barriers to 0 so that students feel comfortable telling me what I'm doing wrong. I wrote a 30-line PHP thing that just sends me an email with what's in the comment box. And that way, as soon as students see that I address these comments instantly in class, you get instant feedback. Doesn't mean I'm going to do what the comments ask me to do, but it means I'll address them. And that way we project that we're listening and we're adapting. And there are some things that are asked to be done, and if we don't do them, I have to say why, right? It puts me on the spot. Tech enables that. It makes it fast and instant. It makes things more accessible, and this is to learners of different types. So for example, before every class, I have a before class reading. Most of our classes have that. But I also have a before class viewing that I used Zoom. During the pandemic, I did synchronously teach my classes, but I also recorded them to the cloud so that students can then watch the derivations and things later. It's a lot nicer when you don't have to rely on your notes, which you might have missed something. Later on, I remembered to wear a black shirt so they could see the math in front of my chest. And finally, it's archival, where something as simple as using your cell phone to take pictures of the blackboards. It's not just a matter of getting the notes onto paper, it's the arrangement of the visual elements to bring back those cues and student experiences. So every year we get pictures of the blackboards. Students miss something in the notes, they've got it right there. It takes 6 seconds. And that simple little bit of tech makes an enormous difference when it comes to studying for quizzes. I know from Canvas engagement, they get downloaded by our students and saved for later. I hope they'll be useful for later. With that, I'll cede the floor and welcome our next panelist.
Right, so I'm Sean Robinson from the physics department, where I run the junior lab, as was introduced earlier. Do we have to brag about how long we've been at MIT? Is that the? I've been here 3 years longer than Mike has, apparently. Also, very fun. I am from the associate director of the physics junior lab, but as of 6 days ago, the physics department now has a physics education group, which I'm the head of. So that's nice. New developments, which is all the academic instructional staff in the physics department, gives us a sort of administrative home. So unrelated to the topic of today's things, but it's nice that the 14 of us or so in the physics department are now actually a group. Also, I suppose before I get started, I was pointing out, on the way here, I discovered this typo on my slide. So I don't know if this is Freudian, if this is just thinking about this topic today, mentally put us all back to that fall semester. Regardless, it's certainly relevant today, so not on purpose, but there we are. So on the subject of continuous improvement using tech, one of the goals is the continuous improvement is the goal, right? And the technology is a tool to get there. So the real question is how to do those sort of things most efficiently. How to use the tool best. Hopefully, I guess, not use the tool destructively. I won't comment on that, but of course, it's something to keep in mind. So I'm going to talk about Junior Lab in Course 8 as an example of something we've been doing. So first, I should just, for context, talk about the class itself, because I'm sure not everybody has the physics department's curriculum memorized. So Junior Lab, as the name implies, is a course usually taken by third-year physics majors. It's a 2-semester sequence, course 813 and 814. Most physics majors, given the way our requirements are structured for graduation, most students are required to take the first semester 813. Most are not required to take the second semester 814. Tends to be a little more of a self-selected group of people who want to do experimental physics. The overall learning goal here is really the professional development of the student as a scientist. People who teach this course, whether it's our course at MIT or the way this course slots in at physics departments around the United States, all eventually come to this conclusion. What these courses are for, it's about the professional growth of the student. It just so happens that laboratory physics is a particularly good medium to achieve that goal. Whether the specific student is a string theorist or an astrophysicist, somebody who may never touch a piece of apparatus once they're professional, or whether they go on into quantitative finance and are just a physicist who does physicist things in a non-physics setting. It turns out there are many such people. It turns out that the experience of what happens in a laboratory, the sort of uncontrolled, just barely chaotic settings of having to encounter real devices, where you don't necessarily know not even what the answer is going to be, but even what counts as a good answer, like a research problem. That turns out to be a particularly good medium for teaching things like just the sort of the community of practice type things about attitudes, language, how professionals talk to each other, judgment about when to decide the problem could be better, but I've got to publish. I've got to call it a day and go work on my other problem sets or whatever it is, knowing when to stop. Because at this point in history, the notions of Albert Einstein working alone in his study as a lone genius, that's just not how the profession works at all. Thank you. Mm-hmm. People who, within the physics, whether it's MIT or the broader physics education community around the country, who have not taught this type of class, they probably took it at some point in their history, they think of it as maybe physics theory is very difficult, so it's nice to have a hands-on complement to it, where you see how it's done in practice. It turns out these courses are not very good at that. There is some data to support that. And it's also not about specific bench skills, which really contrasts with most of our colleagues in, say, biology or chemistry, where you're going to go to that laboratory class, learn some, learn how to titrations or some specific thing you do, and then you're going to graduate and go get a job doing that skill in industry. Physics as a profession just doesn't work that way. It's more about the modes of thought is what we really care about. It's also apparently why people hire our graduates. So that's a little bit about the course itself and its goals. One of the questions is how we got to those goals. So I've been in charge of this course for about 13 years. We've been working really continuously on improving the course. Every semester we do something new pretty much since about 2010 or so. And one of the first pieces of this is just figuring out what those goals were. What was the thing on the previous slide? What should it be? So there's a question about how did we get there? And this is, again, not necessarily a technology question. I don't know shortcuts. I think you actually have to do the legwork. We talked to a lot of alumni. We talked to a lot of current students, current instructors, former instructors, people who teach similar types of material at other institutions, employers who hire people. What do they care about what we do? And so it was really useful to eventually articulate those goals, that this is a course where a lot of other courses people learn how to do a lot of, in our case, physics, I might say science in general. But then there's this particular course in the curriculum where people learn how to be a physicist. And that's our goal here. So yeah, just talking to lots of people. That was not a Canvas thing. That was not a technology thing. So ultimately we did get there, but then we had to design a course that executed those things. What we ultimately landed on is a course where in the first semester, where a lot of these people have not even seen hands-on work before, you have a sequence of exercises on this sort of multi-dimensional learning curve, learning surface. Many in-class exercises on basic skills and concepts, and then they go into these longer experiments that are the main meat of the course. One of the things they have to do is make the most of that in-class time when they're with the instructors in the lab. Or am I on time? 1 minute, yes, thank you. It's all made possible by a lot of online preparatory work. And then in the second semester also. So people have to know what they're doing before time to get into class. So for us in circa 2011, 12, wherever we were, this was MITx for us. Being able to deliver that content so students come to class already knowing what they don't understand. And we have very, very efficient discussions. That's something we did for a long time. Keep on tweaking the details of that. But eventually, like everybody else, everything got upended in the past couple of years. We had to make some changes, and we learned a ton of things. So this is kind of where we're going now. So we all learned Zoom was great for giving classes. In junior lab, students have to give presentations. And of course, those were all done by Zoom, like every scientific conference was done for the past, for that stretch of years. Now we're back to being in person, and people are giving in-person presentations, but we want to record all those presentations. We had a clunky in-house system because the students have to review those presentations as part of their CIM requirements. And so now we've figured out, well, actually, we all know how to use Zoom now. Just turn around the laptop and click the button. It's not as good as what our colleagues from AV will give us, but it gets the job done. We started using Slack for in-class communication. We use Canvas, and the messaging announcements is great. This class runs like a big research group. The faculty use Slack as their thing. So lots of channels for each of the experiments within Slack. People can report bugs. If there's a typo in the lab guide, we find out right away. We don't find out 3 weeks later when everybody got it wrong. Each lab partnership, the students work in partners, we can see their chat with each other, and we're included in those private channels. They can pop us in. A post in the general channel on a Slack workspace is a lot more active back and forth than making an announcement like on the Canvas or Stellar front page. It's a conversation instead of an announcement. That's actually really cool. So we used to have like this big clunky reservation system, a calendar for when you'd reserve different pieces of apparatus. Now someone just goes in the experiment channel and says, I would like, the NMR device Thursday of 2 to 5 p.m. Thank you. Finally is the biggest thing. It's the thing in progress. We are experimenting with MITx on Canvas. One thing we did have with all these things was like, at some point 7 different websites the students had to create identities on and logins. There was a big administrative overhead, and we heard about it every single year in the course evaluations. And the faculty hated it, everybody hated it. We've consolidated almost all of it into Canvas. The one last thing that wasn't was all that preparatory material, which we had already written in MITx. The problem types didn't exist in Canvas, so it was very hard. But a lot of people, perhaps some people here, I'm not sure, have worked on figuring a way to embed MITx Canvas as MITx content as assignments in Canvas. It's not really obvious how to make this work well, but it is working right now. I believe we're the only group at MIT that's doing this. It's fascinating. It is working. It's actually working. But there's definitely stuff to learn from that. So, but I'm definitely out of time. So that's where we're at. Things keep on going.
Hello. So, if you forgive me, I'm going to be a little old school. My name is Moni Avello. I am the 701, which is Introductory Biology instructor. A little bit about what that means for some of you who might not be familiar. So 701 is Introductory Biology. It is a General Institute requirement, or a GIR, which means every undergraduate at MIT must take our class or pass out of it in order to graduate, which means that we are serving a wide range of folks, a lot of first years, but also a lot of second years, third years, fourth years. There's a real mix now in who we are serving in our classes. And these classes are obviously undeclared folks to course majors and slim majors, and we get the whole gamut. They can range anywhere from 60 students, just 60, to 425 in my short time being an instructor, which is since January 2021. And every class, there's 4 flavors of these classes. There's 2 run per semester, and every single 701 has 2 different professors who have different desires and expertise and things they're very excited about, and teaching teams that can range anywhere from 3 TAs, modest, to 20. And then me, and then however many students there are. And so I think something that I just want to give you sort of the appreciation of is we have a very broad audience, the broadest possible, the entire MIT undergrad population. And I, as an instructor, I am actually balancing and trying to consider what works the best for both the professors and what they are desiring for their vision of this class. They set the syllabus, they deliver the lectures, I assist them in basically everything they do. A teaching team who is helping facilitate the learning, and on the ground with the students, and then obviously our students, who we want to all have a working understanding of biology because we think it's important for being informed citizens in the world, whether they also believe that or not. And so I think what I want to say is I have a very unique position in that I started when we were completely remote. if you might recall. In 2021, we weren't back yet. And so it means that when I did this, I guess I'm a lifer too. I was here in 2010. I was a postbac student, took a bunch of courses as a student, was a graduate student, TA'd a bunch of courses, and I was a postdoc, built a bunch of courses, and now I'm an instructor and I coordinate a lot of courses. So I have, in fact, TA'd some of these courses that I'm in. Oh, I lost my train of thought, but I think I was probably saying something about the interesting challenge of we are negotiating very interesting interests. Everything we do as a design has to be based on the principle of really two things. Like, how are we going to maximize our students' experience? We want things to be efficient, we want things to be consistent, accessible, and we want them to find biology to be fun, especially if you're like, no, please, not biology. We want them to be like, no, but it's really cool. Like, we want you to actually understand this. This is important. You are living. And we want the teaching team to be effective, and we want them to enjoy themselves. Like, we want the professors to feel like they're having a good time, get to connect with the students. We want the teaching teams to actually teach. Our TAs teach students in recitations, which means they get their own individual learning experience as teachers. We want them to have that, and we want the students to learn. We want to give them feedback. We don't want grading to take up a lot of time. And so any decision we make, we have to first ask, what's the goal? Like, why are we using the technology? When I came into this position, I had, let's see, I have everything, and plus some folks have mentioned, we had Canvas as the LMS, it's great, Gradescope or MITx for assessments, Zoom as a way of conversing remotely, Piazza for students to talk to us and to each other, Poll Everywhere for polling, whether we did it asynchronously or during classes, and Slack, which we primarily use for the teaching team. We've experimented a little bit with students, but maybe not to the extent some of my other co-panelists have described. And so we've made a bunch of decisions, and I think I want to actually highlight a little bit of like the process of how we've done it as more generalizable principle, and then if I can, with enough time, I'll describe one example. And so I think the process is very simple. One, get clear on the goal. Like, what are you trying to do? If you're going to use technology, it can't just be because it's bright and shiny. It should connect to something you care about that you've set for either your teaching team, for your students, or perhaps for both. And then, implementation really matters. No matter how great the tool is, if you botch something, you traumatized everybody involved. You traumatize the students, you traumatize yourself, you traumatize your professors, your teaching assistants. And so either spending a lot of time in the implementation. I know a co-panelist mentioned interviewing or talking to a lot of people. This is very valuable. You have not done this in a vacuum. Other people have expertise. Go seek them, ask their advice. Implementation matters. And the other is do a safe to try experiment. In that, start small. Like, don't commit to completely flipping your entire classroom semester around. Maybe start with a lecture, have a taste. And then, obviously, you want to gather feedback. The best feedback is some metric that you think is a measure of success. Are your students actually showing up? Are they engaged? Do you actually ask them for their feedback and they tell you this is working? Do your teaching assistants like what you're doing? And then iterate. And so you can, every round, or maybe perhaps even in a lecture, whatever grain size is your safe to try experiment, a semester, a recitation session, can you improve? Can you gather what's good? Can you try to get rid of what's bad? And can you keep going? And can you grow? And as I think someone said beautifully, the goal is obviously continuous growth. And so hopefully you never stop and you're never static. Now, I've been here very shortly, so I've only been serving as an instructor for a little over a year. And so I want to give you like one example of this just as a quick evolution. Exams. We all take exams. Our students take exams. We grade exams. We implement them. When I started remotely in, let's say, 7012, our largest class, 425 students, easy. All our exams were on Gradescope. They were remote. They were 24-hour because who knew where our students were in the world? Then fall 2021 hit, and we were back on campus for the first time. And we were all not very sure of what was going to happen in the semester. Were we all going to go remote again? Like, what's even happening? And so we again did remote, 24 or perhaps a 12-hour one. We did a couple iterations in different classes. And it worked, but my professors had concerns about academic integrity. And we had some instances where it did look, and some students did, in fact, unfortunately, confess that they had cheated because they could. And that was really disappointing. And so coming back to this semester, there were all these great things about Gradescope, which is the technology we used on exams. It's, from a grading perspective, really wonderful. It's really cool from a student perspective. You can write P-sets where you ask people to upload videos like demonstrating some principle, and you can grade it really easily. You can ask all sorts of questions that are interesting and yet close-ended and graded, so that TAs are really focusing their time grading free responses where students are actually articulating biology in their own words. So they're like really getting to see students actually try to articulate biology, which is really cool, and they get to focus on that. It's great in terms of consistency because we can actually see how everyone's grading, and we can assign people to questions, and so that students are being graded evenly. There's a bunch of great things about it. And so I asked my professor, could we do this again? But could we ask the students to come in person? And then I feel like that meets your interest of preventing any, perhaps, the dark siren call of looking up things on Google if you're taking your exam at 2 a.m. in the morning and feeling desperate. Or, let's see, let me have, but still be able to give students a consistent experience. Their P-sets are on Gradescope. We don't want to suddenly switch to paper. Also, I don't want to scan 425 exams. That's not a good use of my time when I am one instructor split across 2 courses per semester. And my professor very reasonably said, I'm willing to do this. That sounds good for the teaching team, which is an important consideration. And she said, the only way we're going to do this if it's good for the students. I don't want my students to come into a class, have to take a computer, frazzledly finish something in 50 minutes, rush off to the next class, disrupting everybody. What if the technology fails? Is the internet connectivity good enough? All of these were really valid questions. And so I said, if I can answer every single one of your concerns and convince you that the implementation of this will be flawless, can we commit to this design decision? TLDR, she said yes. Spoiler alert, we've already done this. We had 362 students take computer exams across 3 different lecture halls with a bunch of teaching assistants and proctors, and no tech failures except for somebody not bringing their computer or their computer crashing. And we had planned for it because we spent hours talking about the implementation of how we were going to do this. We talked to ISNT. I interviewed Course 6 instructors who already do this for their very large classes and got a lot of advice in order to make this a success. And so I think my time is probably up, but I just want to say that in summary, I think technology, there's a lot of really cool technology, especially after the pandemic. There's a lot there. And I think what makes the most sense is to always use your own goals for yourselves as the instructors and the teaching teams, as well as your students. Balance, obviously you want to maximize everyone's experience to the best possible. And ask, how can I implement this successfully? How can I do this in a modest way? How can I expand it if it's really, really cool? How can I keep getting feedback and iterating? In essence, you're being a learning engineer. But how can you do that? And that's what I would recommend and what I hope to continue doing in the 701s as an instructor, supporting my professors and my teaching teams and students. Whew. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to stay up there and we'll join. Wonderful. Have a discussion. Thank you so much. There's 2, as everyone comes up, there's 2 pieces that struck me, and I'll sit down here as well. The first one, just to build off your last piece, which was sort of that idea of learning engineering, it's something we talk a lot about in our group, and sort of have been thinking about what does it mean to sort of cycle through these iterations? What does it mean to collect evidence and understand how that impacts the decisions about design? And I think it's a really good frame for thinking about some of the thoughts and questions that we'll sort of come back to. I was struck by a couple of pieces from the group as a whole, which was the first one, everybody came back to goals. Everybody came back to like, what do we actually hold valuable for this course? So whether that be from an individual course perspective and an individual instructor, whether that be from a sort of the group and the sort of profession, whether that be from a community of people who are teaching these courses sort of down the line. One of the things that I think is really important is understanding the sort of needs of the community. And so how do you know which ideas and goals to pursue? Like, how have you made the decision of like, okay, there's 7 things that I could potentially address this next iterative cycle, but I'm going to choose these 3 or these 2. I'm just curious if anybody's had some experience in that explicit sort of like decision process and what went into it.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure. I could say in our case, we're almost always operating in a resource-strapped version. So it's almost always the decision is not sort of what's the most educationally useful thing. It's usually what's the lowest hanging fruit. It's not the most noble of approaches, but it's what we can get done. We could go for the thing that's clearly the best choice, but if we see this, we're probably just not going to be able to get it with the available hours of staff time, with whatever budget is available. If we just can't do it, then we'll try something else, and we sort of put it on a list for the future of other things we want to try. When it gets to some critical moment where we really have to do the big thing. So it's usually as pedestrian as that for us.
No, that makes sense. I think context matters, right? The decisions that we're making are situated within the environment that we're trying to do that. So, Dr. Short, do you have?
Yeah, I guess I would try to balance things like repeatability of experiments versus immediate feedback. And I have one story to relay. So in 2020, I taught Lightboard synchronous remote, recorded the lectures. In 2021, we were back. I flipped the classroom with the students' somewhat permission. It was a great hit. So I said, let's do it again. And I got so many anonymous rants of, this just isn't cutting it for me, that I said, okay, let's have a poll. And then the day after I got those comments, we did a poll, and I said, look, if it's 50-50 split, we're going to have to keep with flip because it's in the catalog. It was a violent vomiting objection to the flipped classroom. There was a couple people who just said, no, I am sick of online video. I want to come in and be talked to. Mm-hmm. Cool. Switch the next day. Left the videos up there for everyone who still wanted them. So I guess balancing, repeating these experiments to see if they work, with the knowledge that every year you have new people with different experiences and different desires.
I think that last bit is really important in understanding that repeatability in that those learners are changing. Their experience, what they've come to expect or want out of different from different times and different parts of their learning may change as well. Moni, any?
Yeah, I wanted a +1 on the low-hanging fruit or feasibility part that Sean mentioned, because it's sometimes something is easy or like low-hanging fruit, why not, right? Like it's not hard to implement that. And then sometimes it's because you're like strapped for time and you're just like, this is what's happening right now. I think if I were to add anything else, I will say in my perspective, because I am often responding to folks' desires, I will say sometimes it's as simple as my professor telling me it's really important to me that students engage in class and that like we really know if they're getting the material like in real time, lump sum, and they say we need to make polling happen, like it needs to happen, and I'm just like, yep, all right, I'm gonna learn poll everywhere because you've told me this is a priority and I will throw my life into figuring it out. And so sometimes it can also be as simple as there's one thing we really want to accomplish, can you please make this work? And then just pick one thing and try it. And from last time I tried this, and we're doing it again this semester, I have learned a lot about how to make this happen, and I think I have gotten one step closer to my professor's vision of what in-class polling looks like, and it is much better this semester compared to the first semester I tried it. And so I think I think it made sense. The goal was we want to engage students in class and we want to make sure they understand, and we said that was a high priority, and so we picked one thing, and I said, this is new for me, I didn't do it during the Zoom times, let's make this happen. And I've picked one thing. And this semester we're doing it again, and we've made it more intense. We do polling competitions. We're like pitting recitations against each other, and then like we like buy them snacks, and like people are designing T-shirts, and like it's getting close to the vision of what my professor had once done in a former class that she also taught, and she's very pleased, and I'm very pleased. I think it's really cool, and the students seem to be really engaged in coming to class.
I think that's a really one piece I want to pull out of that specifically. It's a great example, and it's an example of that it's not necessarily going to work perfectly that first round,
no.
Right? That part of the iterative process is understanding, where were the failure points and are they addressable? Where was it that things went really well, and where was it that things maybe didn't go as well as we wanted, and how do we address those pieces rather than just saying, well, the whole thing didn't work. Right, and sort of understanding the value proposition of that trade-off, which is sort of inevitable, which brings me to sort of the next piece, which is one of the things that I think I heard across all of the conversation was feedback loops, this sort of idea of, there's sort of this collection of evidence, there's this collection of ideas, and in your example, that sort of that polling and in these pieces. And I'm curious what other evidence you utilize that maybe is as straightforward as sort of something directly from the feedback, but maybe is more open. Other people might not think of it as evidence. Maybe it's your perceptions of preparedness for class, or maybe it's other parts of your experience in facilitating, communities within the group. So it's how many people are actually posting on the Slack or on the discussion board. I'm just curious, where you all sort of consider those points of potential data collection.
Well, I have a couple ones that folks may not have often thought of.
Great.
I took our department through ABET accreditation. And one of the best pieces of feedback we got was from our students' employers, saying what our students were really good at and what they wish our students were really good at. Another one was I had assumed, naturally, that people would do the reading for courses, and I noticed a distinct linear drop in lack of preparedness over time, starting about 2014. When I first polled folks, it was 80%. By 2020, it was 20%. So naturally, now should be 0. So that's what led to the impetus to start flipping things, which started happening a little before the pandemic, but of course that kicked it into overdrive and it made it actually happen. And now we go back, students are like, I would rather do the reading than watch another video. But the point is to ask and adapt and show that you're open to that feedback.
Interesting. Great.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm thinking of only the obvious things, like when students actually show up to a thing is like a really obvious metric, and we try to collect all those things. Oh, non-obvious. I suppose, I think someone mentioned like Canvas clicks or like things. I guess like for those who don't know, there are like analytics on Canvas, and so you can there's some really cool technology data about I see the exponential curve of how many PSES submissions are started right before the deadline. So you get a sense of when students are actually starting their submissions, or as simple as how often are students on Canvas, or what had they actually gone and looked at the solutions key you posted. And so there are ways to actually see where students are going within your digital sort of resources, and just taking a glance at that can sometimes be really helpful, because you might notice wow, everyone's clicking on this one thing, and I wonder why, and then you can send your TAs out into the field to ask their students and report back to you. And so I haven't done that in earnest, but I do definitely use it when I'm trying to see if an unengaged student isn't really anywhere, or are they active at all. But I think it can also yield a lot of insights if you're even if you just look at it bird's eye view, and anyone who's a coder, you can do some really cool things with it. So highly recommend.
Yeah. I know when we first started putting our preparatory work, these are basically reading quiz type questions. Did you read the lab manual before you showed up to the first day of the experiment? It's those type of materials. When we first started using that on MITx, there was this qualitative perception amongst the teaching staff that, oh my gosh, everyone knows what they're doing all of a sudden. But there's no real metrics for that. We all saw the transition, but how do we back that up? Eventually, Aaron and I actually did dig into a lot of MITx click data and timing, and see, was it really true that people were actually engaging that material? There's a whole nother talk. There's a whole book chapter on what we did, but the conclusion was yes, people actually were engaging material before coming to class. A rather simple conclusion, but at least it gives you something quantitatively that we could back up the very very qualitative, very soft observations of the sort of the craft of the expert instructor in the room. So there are those things. I don't know, as someone who's just a teacher, not a data scientist, that's so inaccessible to us. I haven't actually tried it in Canvas at all, but certainly in MITx stuff, the data was there, but very very difficult to get at without expert help.
Yeah, so I'll take this as a quick plug, so thank you for that. Which is to say, our group in our office is always happy to collaborate with whomever has these types of questions, right? So if you're curious about these types of pieces and you want to ask some more detailed questions, or you want to have conversations about, hey, we're thinking about doing this, but would really like to understand what's been going on maybe with some of the data before, we're happy to help facilitate that conversation and exploration and do some of the work collaboratively. So happy to do that. Thanks for the plug. That was not prompted, I promise. I will close out with asking this sort of general question, which is, all three of you have engaged in forms of iterative improvement in your specific courses. If you had maybe some advice to give others who might be just starting to really think about this for whatever reasons, maybe it's they've come back from the pandemic and they really want to transform what they've been doing, or maybe it's just they're seeing some changes in the students, they want to address them. I'm curious, generally speaking, what advice might you give others who are starting off in this journey of sort of iterative improvement? It's a tough one, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I will throw my answer out into the void. I would say, I would probably say to this human, talk to a lot of other people. So just like survey the scene.
That's going to be my answer.
Oh, well, then you got to talk to some other people. And I think so, like, one, just like build your networks. MIT is a wonderful collection of many kingdoms, which unfortunately means we often get siloed. And so finding people who are doing things that are really exciting and just collecting things. And then feasibility, like don't change everything. Pick one thing that you're like, I could do this within your context. Are you one professor and you call all the shots? Are you in a huge team? You got to negotiate. Like, what are you capable of? And then start small. Just try it, and then collect feedback. See how you feel about it, and move from there. And it can be as modest as that. But if you have the appetite for it and you like get this process, there's a lot that you can do. And so that's what I would say to a human who was like, maybe.
Yeah, I've got something else I'd add too, is now that there are so many tools out there, I would say the same thing that we ask our students to do, which is to do your prep work and start as soon as you can. My fall classes are all fully prepared before the fall semester starts. I started doing that because when I didn't do that, it was a constant scramble and things got dropped. But what that also does is it forces, let's say, funneling you to organize your course through Canvas, also funnels your brain to organize your course in your mind. And then you're going to come up with ways of using new things that you've read about, heard, synthesized when you're on a run, when you're sleeping, when you're supposed to be paying attention at a faculty meeting, or whenever the opportunity strikes you. And to give your subconscious time to create those ideas. It's non-deterministic. I don't think anyone's ever found a way to be like, here's how you become more creative. The only thing I could say is give yourself the time, and it'll pay back in spades when you teach the course.
Yeah, and I would say, I'd love to say this is a research and development process, you follow a scientific method, but for me it's really you have a gut instinct that comes from your observations of everything. You've been an expert in this environment. So a lot of times what we're doing is craft. We should do the legwork to understand the science and understand the tools and understand the engineering. I found letting your own sort of intuition guide you for a while, but use those tools as a constraint that keeps you on the straight and narrow. Sometimes your intuition is wrong. A lot of people's intuition about how learning happens is just absolutely wrong. I think probably everyone in this room probably agrees with that. And it takes a while to learn how to be a good teacher. But you sort of follow the path that seems right in trust your own expertise, but also kind of lean on others, because sometimes you just really are doing something that's dumb, and sometimes other people can help rein you in. So working as a team and trusting yourself, but also trusting people around you and valuing their opinions is huge.
Well, thank you all for sharing your ideas, your journeys, your advice. It's been tremendous and awesome, and I know it's going to be a wonderful resource that we can share with many beyond just those that are in the room. So please join me in thanking everyone. And I do want to take a quick second for those that are in the room. If there are any questions, where we can sort of take a few here at the end and before everybody has to run.
Now I can jump in on that. More and more I feel like I'm in good company. One of the most important things that's happened, and we have talked about, is that MIT's incentive structure for faculty is changing. When I started here, I was told by some, not everybody, to be an okay teacher. Don't spend your time being a great one, because your research will suffer. And now excellence in teaching is explicitly valued in tenure and promotion. That's probably the biggest single thing that could happen, because it tells everyone starting out, be a great teacher and it will help you. It won't just be a marginal improvement, it'll be really noticed. And we talk about this kind of stuff a lot. We're a small department in nuclear, but we have to be ahead of the curve because our field is so contentious, politically motivated, personal, it affects everyone, and small.
Yeah, for me, I know it's a little bit of all of the above. For the most part, yeah, the physics department's actually a really good community where good teaching is valued. As a staff member, where in principle the research faculty could, certain things flow downhill. It could be the worst job in the world if it was like nobody has to care about the teaching. But no, it's actually people respect what we do and value it. Most of the faculty care very much about doing their teaching well and want the research and development and the classroom support that we can provide. And some people are just like, okay, the teaching is good enough. I saw good teachers when I was a student. I just imitate them, and that gets you okay. It gets to the good enough bar of university teaching, which is not necessarily awesome, but it's good enough. And then there's people who really want to become, as part of their professional identity, in my case as a physicist, they also want to be a professional educator. They want to go that extra level. And it's certainly not every member of the physics department, but there's a nice core of people who want to do that. So yeah, it's not so bad.
Yeah, I'll say in biology, I'm very fortunate having come from, I'm still part of the MITx bio group, which is part of the digital learning lab, and BIT also obviously does not just edX and massive open online courses and like cool outward facing stuff, but also helps with a lot of residential education. And so I think having come from being a postdoc in that position and moved over to an instructor, I'm like still very adjacent and obviously working with everybody still as colleagues. And so my experience, but I think this might be new, I'm not sure if my predecessors necessarily felt the same way, but in my current position as an instructor in the biology department, I feel like I have 10 different professors who care very deeply about doing a good job and engaging the students, and I have a bunch of colleagues who I trust who are very skilled and knowledgeable, and that I am sort of a conduit between the two of them. And so I think, and that we have a bunch of junior faculty, and they all seem to be very exciting, and there are members of our group who are engaging them in pedagogy, and some of them are coming into the 701s. And so I think from my view, but very historically not old, it seems like we have a lot of interest that is just like growing in our department.
Yeah.
I want to thank everyone again for coming and sharing and being part of the conversation. If you've got any follow-up, happy to stick around for a few moments, but I want to be cognizant of the time and let everybody go. So thank you, everyone.